Wow, so I'm seeing all over Twitter that apparently Joe Biden is coming after air conditioning. And on the surface, I thought, wow, this is great. If Joe Biden, without reading, into the details of the story, if he just banned air conditioning, all the normies would leave Florida. All of the people who, certainly people who weren't born here, but even a lot of people who were, would say, I'm getting the hell out of here. And I would probably be able to, buy a beach house for, who knows, 5 grand, 10 grand. Hell, once they go into foreclosure, the banks might just give them away. Because no one wants to live here without air conditioning, even in the winter. You still need air conditioning in Florida if you don't want to be hot. And while I would hate it at night, that's when I really, really like air conditioning. The rest of the day, I'd be fine with no air if it meant that things were affordable and that all the people left and it was just a ghost town and, all the cities turned into Detroit. Now, that part wouldn't be very nice. Hopefully not with all the crime stuff. But anyway, what actually is the story of Biden coming after air conditioning? Apparently, the EPA has a new ruling. They're just going to reduce hydrofluorocarbons, which is refrigerant, by 40% next year. Or is it within the next couple of years? I can't remember. I think it was 40%. That's what they said. It was 40% in 1 year. And that means 40% less for refrigerant. And you would think then, well, gee, we would have 40% less air conditioning and 40% less refrigeration, for food. Well, apparently they claim this is not going to be the case. They say, well, no, they just have to use alternative refrigerants, that are not greenhouse gases. Now, for those of you who were old enough to remember R12, I happen to have a vintage can of R12 sitting right next to me that I've always hung on to all these years as sort of a relic of the past. There was a big moral panic in the 90s about the hole in the ozone layer that was being caused by R12 refrigerant. That was what was used for, decades as refrigerant inside of air conditioners and freezers and refrigerators. And they said that this gas, when it was released, when it leaked out of the pipes and, eventually, when it made it into the air, it would eat a hole in the ozone. That was what we were told. So we had to switch to R134A. That was the environmentally friendly refrigerant. So everything had to be switched over to R134A. And if you have an old car that's like older than like 93 or something, I think is when they switched over, you would have had to have had your car retrofitted to use the new refrigerant, assuming that you don't still have that you don't have a bunch of cans of R12 refrigerant so that you can recharge your AC when it leaks out. Like I said, I still have a can, but I'm hanging on to it for sentimental reasons. Anyway, now the Biden administration is saying R134A is bad too. And why is R134A bad? Well, they say, well, that's a greenhouse gas. So R12 was bad because it burned through the atmosphere and I assume went out into space or something. It just escaped. It was not bounded by the atmosphere. It would eat through it. Now we're told that R134A is bad because it's not going through the atmosphere. It's trapped, it's trapped in the atmosphere, and that makes it a greenhouse gas. Because it lets the sun through and then it retains the heat. I mean, these people just can't make up their minds. So anyway, now we have to reduce R134A, and I assume there are other refrigerants, but that's the main one, I think, by 40%. So you would think, wow, the air conditioning industry must be pissed about this. They're going to have to, if this is the refrigerant that they use, they're going to have to reduce their air conditioning by their production by 40%. Because presumably, if there was an alternative, they would be using it, right? Well, no, apparently. The air conditioning lobby released a statement praising the EPA, saying, we've been waiting for this. Oh my gosh, this is so good. We're so happy that the EPA has come to this decision because we really need to move on from these harmful refrigerants. That made me question, well, gee, air conditioning lobby, it was so great to get away from these harmful refrigerants. Why haven't you done it already? You know, I mean, if there's an alternative that is more environmentally friendly, we're told, than R134A, which, by the way, R134A, from what I understand, does not harm the environment. It's bad because it's a so-called greenhouse gas, and greenhouse gases are bad. Why? Not exactly clear to me, considering that as greenhouse gases have increased, the planet has become greener, which the name would kind of imply that. Longer growing seasons to facilitate food production for a ever-growing human population seems like a good thing to me. It seems like you would want the Earth to be getting warmer as we have a bigger population so that we can grow more food and therefore not have famines. But I guess if your goal is to reduce population, maybe having a warmer planet would be a catastrophe because you want there to be famines because you want to be able to kill people off. There's, I guess, some overlap with what we heard from Kamala Harris yesterday. But anyway, back to the air conditioning lobby. Presumably, the reason why they have not switched to these other refrigerants yet, these alternative refrigerants that are not hydrofluorocarbons, is presumably because they're more expensive. And no one is going to use the more expensive refrigerant if there is a cheaper one available. That would just be that would be uncompetitive. And so maybe if you're giving them the benefit of the doubt, they're saying, well, gee, as long as R134A is available, it's going to be super cheap, and we're just competitively, it makes no sense for us to use anything but that. And so therefore, by the EPA mandating that they use the alternative one, even though they wanted to anyway, now they have an excuse to do it because everyone else has to do it anyway, and so everyone is going to have to raise their prices, and so it won't hurt them competitively. That, I guess you could say, is the case in favor of this, that R134A and hydrofluorocarbons are an example of a so-called market failure, which I don't like that term because the market doesn't fail. If it would be the government failing to protect injured parties if there is something, a product that is harmful to people. But the EPA reducing the level of HFCs, if they are truly harmful, this would be an example of them plugging that failure and establishing, proper rules for the market so that it can operate properly without harming people. But I think most of us don't actually buy into the idea that R134A is a harmful substance. And the one thing that we can be sure of is that refrigeration will cost more now as a result of this ruling, because whatever these alternative refrigerants are, if they were better than R134A, or even as good, even on an equal playing field, they'd already be in use. And so the fact that they are not in use, that their use has to be mandated and forced upon and phased in, would seem to suggest that they are actually quite expensive on a relative basis, which can either mean that they cost more to produce or that they are just less effective, meaning if they're not as capable in terms of refrigeration, the machinery has to work harder. You're going to have to buy a bigger AC unit to cool your house because you have a less efficient form of refrigerant. And so that increases the cost of everything else, because whatever else is used in the production of, let's say, an air conditioner, I don't know, copper, I'm sure there's lots of copper in there, and fans and whatnot, all of that is going to have to be, it's going to consume a lot of more resources on that end of the other components if the refrigerant is less effective. And so I would think maybe the AC industry likes this because they can now sell you, and I'm just spitballing here, this is a theory, I'm trying to, based on their words, I'm trying to deduce what they're thinking. Because if this was truly, a bad thing for them, they would be upset about it. There's got to be some reason why the industry is happy about being forced to use a less efficient, less less profitable component in their manufacturing process. The only reason an industry would be happy about that is if they stand to make more money as a result of this rule change. And that would be my guess. Now everyone is going to have to buy a bigger air conditioner. They're going to have to buy a more powerful refrigerator, a better freezer that will cost more, that will have that will use more raw materials to produce it, that will consume probably more electricity, I would think. That's the other thing. These EPA rulings, they never take a holistic view. They don't weigh, gee, if we reduce the hydrofluorocarbons, and now all of our air conditioners and refrigerators have to work a lot harder and consume more energy to do the same work, perhaps we're outputting more greenhouse gases, if that's really your concern, through energy production, increased energy demand, energy consumption, than we would have by just leaving the HFCs in place. Now, this is clearly a top priority for the government, because I was reading an ABC article in which they brag about how they stopped, like 1 million tons of hydrofluorocarbons that were being smuggled across the southern border, which is hilarious. That, like, people are trying to smuggle in refrigerant, and that's what the EPA is putting a stop to. Smuggle in the sex slaves all you want. They'll turn. They don't care about that. Oh, you're just bringing in children to abuse. Yeah, you go right on ahead, sir. Hey, you, with the cans of auto AC recharge. You stop there. You're under arrest. So, getting back to my initial thoughts. Gee, I hope Joe Biden is going to outlaw air conditioning, because that will send the normies back home. That will make Florida cheap again. Apparently that's not the case. He's not going all the way with that. All he's going to end up doing is making things cost more for all of us. We're going to have to spend more on our electric bill in cooling. We're going to have to spend more on an air conditioner. That's the net effect of this. But there will still... So magically, cost of living in Florida and everywhere, but in Florida, that's what I was talking about, is actually going to go up. When my initial thought was, hey, things could get cheaper, because if we actually get rid of AC, nobody would want to live here. So I think this is worse, what Biden's doing. It's worse than banning air conditioning. He's just making it more expensive. So we still have all of the downsides of air conditioning, but we have less of the benefits. So on net, the consumer loses. That's kind of how all of these things go. I would much rather, actually, Joe Biden just outright ban air conditioning in its entirety. And then immediately, all construction in Florida would cease. No one would build a new house in Florida if they can't put an air conditioner in there. And I could live in a mansion. You go back to 1940, when almost no one had an air conditioner in America. Population of Florida is 2 million. What is it now? Over 20. A tenfold increase in our population that would have not been possible without air conditioning. You walk around Florida, nobody opens up their houses. Everyone keeps the doors shut. When they leave, they roll their windows up in their car. They blast the AC. It's a way of life for people here, but not for me. And so I would be at an advantage. Tolerating the heat is one of my few skills in life. So anyway, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.